All right, let's go ahead and kick this off. Again, my name is Adam. Hopefully many of you know me if you're from the Atlanta area and an Audubon member. Thank you so much for joining us for our digital birds and beers. I know that myself and other Audubon people down here and birders in the area have talked about doing a real life birds and beers for quite a while, and no one's actually pulled the trigger. So it's now seemed like a good time to do it. We're all sitting around anyways, probably drinking more than we should, at least I am. So this would be a good time to relax and talk birds and talk beer and whatever else comes up. So I was able to reach out to some friends, which I'm very excited are able to join us. So in addition to myself talking tonight, we have George Armistead, who's the Chief Network Officer for Rockjumper Birding. Jason Ward, who many of you know, hosts of Birds of North America. We have Matt Johnson, who's the Beidler Center Director over there in South Carolina. Josh Engel, who's the owner and lead guide for Redhill Birding. And then Abby Sterling, who's a shorebird biologist for Manomet down in the Georgia Bight. And so the rough outline of all this is I'm gonna kind of go one-on-one with each of our 5 speakers for maybe 10 minutes. I got a couple questions for them. Please feel free to add questions to the chat box, either a burning question you've always wanted to know, or if Abby or George says something interesting and you want to learn more about it, please throw them in the chat box. We'll go from there. Another thing, feel free to go ahead and share if you are drinking a beer or a beverage of choice. I'm drinking a Euphonia Pilsner from New Realm here in Atlanta. I don't think it's named after the bird, but if you don't know what a Euphonia is, it's some finch-like birds of the neotropics. So that's my first bird-themed beer of the evening. We'll see how many I knock through before we're all said and done. But yeah, feel free to share what you're drinking in the chat box. Another thing that I wanted to do, thanks to an idea one of my colleagues, was I was going to kind of drop in a trivia question here or there as we go. And you can either answer them in the chat box or just take notes, and I'll run down the answers at the end. But since it's bird and beer, I wanted to throw out my first trivia question was, which of these bird-themed breweries are real? So what breweries really have these names? Which ones are fake, if any? So A, Hermit Thrush Brewery, B, Rare Bird Brew Pub, C, Birds Fly South Brewing, D, Dead Bird Brewing, or E, all of the above. They're all real breweries. So you can put that in the chat box or keep that for the end, whatever works for you. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start with George, but I had a George-themed trivia question, or inspired by George Armistead, so I'll throw that one out first. Trivia question number 2 is, this chicken-like bird breeds in extreme northern Georgia. They feed almost exclusively on vegetation, including leaves and buds.
Chicken-like bird.
What was that?
Sorry, chicken-like bird breeds in extreme northern Georgia.
Yeah, don't answer it. It's inspired by you. You'll know the answer, but it's for the audience. So yeah, chicken-like bird that breeds in extreme northern Georgia.
Okay.
Feed almost exclusively on vegetation, including leaves and buds, and the males drum to attract a mate. This species is also the state bird of Pennsylvania, where our first guest is from. So what bird is this that I'm talking about? So with that, we're gonna go ahead with George Armistead, and we will go from there. So George, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, great to be here. This is actually like my first sort of birds and beers Zoom call during this whole crazy epic. So I'm very happy to be here. Nice.
Well, I know you showed it, but why don't you start with telling us what you're drinking, and then a little bit about yourself and your position at Rockjumper.
Sure. Yeah, I am drinking a Lagunitas IPA. We have a pretty good stash of them here, so it's an old standby favorite. Nothing too fancy, but I like IPAs, and I'm a fan. So California brewery. But yeah, my job at Rockjumper, I am Chief Network Officer. I still guide some trips. I guide 3, 4, 5 trips a year. Mostly I work with the management team doing partnerships and promotion, and trying to increase our social fabric and get people out looking at birds. All of us, I feel like, do that to one degree or another on this call, but that's part of what I do.
Awesome. And so you kind of led me perfectly into the first question about your guiding. So like you said, I know you still do a couple trips a year, and you've more or less been guiding for 20 20 plus years, maybe, somewhere in that realm. I just didn't know, of all the places you've been, if you had a favorite that you'd led a group of people, and if there's anywhere, a destination on your bucket list that you have not been able to take a group yet.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like my bucket list, like Brazil, is a big one for me. I've never been to Brazil. I really, really want to go. Planning a trip there next year to the Pantanal. I'll hope to get jaguar as well. That's a big one. Favorite place, I don't have a particular favorite, but I always say I like high latitudes and open space. So tundra, deserts, marshes. Some of my favorite trips, I did a lot of Alaska. I've done a lot of ocean trips, Antarctica and the subantarctic islands of New Zealand. Those are some of my favorite trips. Really, really love those. Open space, water, mammals, birds, all that good stuff.
Do you think it's just because a lot of those birds are kind of specialized to that habitat, or is it just the open landscapes, or all of the above?
Yeah. I guess I like being able to see a really long way and have it be kind of uninterrupted by human someplace, and just see desert, see marsh, see tundra, see ocean, and feel like that's all there is. And often in those places it's sort of punctuated equilibrium, right? You're not, for long periods of time, you're seeing nothing. And then all of a sudden it seems like stuff just emerges out of nowhere. And so I love that feeling.
Nice. Very cool. So in addition to your guiding, you have written a few books, including Better Birding Tips, Tools, and Concepts for the Field. For those of us who have not read your book or haven't picked it up yet, can you give us one of your favorite tips or tools, or maybe something to entice us to pick it up, or maybe something that applies to birding at home or birding close to home?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I always, I think we as birders, our main item of gear is our binoculars, right? Binoculars, telescope, optic allow us to kind of zoom in. And I like to tell folks that I have on bird walks or tours to also zoom out and think about, where you are in terms of the calendar, where you are in terms of your habitat. And so I like doing that. I like, zooming in is great. Looking at detail, feather detail of, primary projection and tertial patterns and so forth are great in their place, but it's also wonderful to just think about the habitat you're in and the clues that gives you, the behavior of the bird. So zooming in is great. Zooming out, equally important, I would say.
Nice. And your other book, or maybe you've written more than two, but your other one is about the Field Guide to the Birds of Pennsylvania. And for those of us who haven't spent much time there, why should we bird in Pennsylvania? Why should it be a destination, or what's special about it?
Yeah, well, I like that the history of ornithology, much of it was sort of written, if you will, in Philadelphia. There's a lot of the early ornithologists the work was at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, Audubon, Wilson, and many others. So I feel like it's sort of I call it the birthplace of the nation, which I'm sure, I'm obviously extremely biased, but I think it's got good history. It's got great birds. A tremendous amount is forested. We sort of have this little pocket of coastal plain in the southeast in Philly where I live. And then there's like a little sort of arc of Piedmont. And then you get into this big arc of mountains and valleys. And then west of there is the Allegheny Plateau. And it's remarkable actually how much is still green and forested and full of warblers. It's one of the best states in the country for warblers. And also we seem to be like a little wormhole for like completely strange, weird birds like, black-backed oriole and Bahama wood star. And it's just like some of the strangest, vagrant records Pennsylvania's had its fair share. So it's got some history and some cool birds, I guess.
Very nice. I think I bugged you about this a couple months ago when I first heard about it, but apparently you give a talk called Pornithology, with on the front there. And I just want to know more about this. I assume it has to do with the breeding behavior of birds. So I want to know more about it. And then what are some of your favorite mating, reproductive anecdotes that you touched on during that talk?
Yeah, it's a fun talk. I have given it a lot, and I should update it again because there's just constantly more and new information coming out about weird and unusual breeding behavior of birds. But yeah, that's really what it focuses on, is sort of the odd and unusual breeding strategies, mating strategies, courtship strategies, and thinking about how weird that is. And I love to add some innuendo just to make it seem particularly strange, from a human perspective. So yeah, I'll tell you one thing I avoid talking about in that talk is ducks. Because ducks they're the freakiest of the birds. They really are. They Jason's nodding his head. They really are just like, they get after it, and it's ugly and weird. And so that is like a whole nother talk, a whole nother probably 3-hour documentary that nobody would want to see in and of itself. But yeah, like that, ducks are strange. So I touch a little bit upon that, but mostly I steer into other grounds. I like to talk about the Andean and the cock of the rock, which is obviously has a great bird name, but also there's 2 species. They're in the Cotinga families. They have these sort of red light districts where but it's the males that show up and are sort of gallivanting around trying to impress females. And so that's always kind of strange and fun. And the ruffs also, the shorebird, the ruff, the ruffs and reeves. There's alpha males, beta males. There are what they call fader males, which are males that actually look exactly like females, but are much larger and have testes that are like twice the size of the average male. So weird and fun. So those are a couple of my favorites, I guess.
Nice. Well, I see that none of the presenters did it today. Maybe we could not poke fun at Josh, but ask Josh this question also. So being very conscious of what my background is during these Zoom calls everyone's doing these days. Right now I have a very bland door in my bedroom. But if you were to prop up some bird books besides your own books, to either highlight your bona fides or to kind of say something about yourself, what bird book would you want over your shoulder on a Zoom call that would describe George?
That's a great question, boy. I'm trying to make sure I don't offend anybody, but if the pornithology, response didn't already,
right.
But I guess, one book I really love that I think sort of flies a little bit under the radar is Steve Howell's Molt book. Molt is a subject that most people either, it seems uninteresting or seems too dense to peel back the layers on. That book I think is one of the biggest contributions to our understanding of birds in the last 10 or so years. So that's one of my favorites. Other than that, I love field guides to different regions. I love looking at, I've got Birds of Peru right now that I'm pouring through. There's a couple different new Birds of Colombia books. And then I love looking at some of the old ones from, like Birds of the Greater Sundas, and places that Birds of Wallacea, places I don't even know where they are on a map, just obscure field guides.
All right, I had just a couple more for you. One more here is I know you're an Eagles fan, but if for some reason, and I know Jason's a fellow NFC East, rival of yours, so we can talk about that later. But if for some reason Eagle came to you and said, George, we're abandoning the eagle, we need to rebrand a new bird species, what would you pick as the new Philadelphia football team?
Wow. I want to pick the Peregrine Falcon, but of course you guys, that kind of it's already been taken down there in Atlanta. Boy, I don't know, maybe something like kind of really ugly and strange, like the sheath bill or the brown-headed cowbird, something that, you know, could use a plug, you know? Yeah. Blue collar city, you know, I don't know.
A couple quick hitters here. We're doing a backyard bird bracket, 32 backyard birds of Atlanta. We're down to our championship. It's Northern Cardinal versus Eastern Bluebird. What's your pick? What's your preferred of the two?
I got to go with Eastern Cardinal, or Northern Cardinal, you said, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Northern Cardinal, yep.
Eastern Bluebird, Northern Cardinal. I'm going to go Northern Cardinal. There's only 3 in the genus. They are spectacular. I forget who it was. I think it was Scott Weidensaw or somebody said that if Northern Cardinal only existed on one mountaintop in the world, people would make pilgrimages to go see it. And yet it's a very common bird for all of us, or for many of us, happily. So I got to go with the Cardinal.
Nice. And last question for you. I know you told us earlier it's snowing in Philadelphia, but migration's on the way. I know you had a couple palms and pines are showing up. Do you have a favorite Eastern migrant? Is there a bird you're most excited about showing up?
I guess, you know, it sounds sort of, the bird that, there's, I guess, I'll give you 2 if that's all right. The sing has arrived here, and they're chimney swift and house wren. House wrens, of course, winter not too far to the south of us here in Philadelphia, but as soon as you hear a house wren's song, that really, to me, is an indicator that spring is here. And the same thing with chimney swift. As soon as I hear a chimney swift, I'm like, okay, it's legit. Spring is here. You know, we should be finding a lot of other good stuff right now. So those 2 are kind of my harbingers of spring.
Awesome, George. Well, yeah, if you're willing and able to stick around and drink some more beer, I'm going to bounce around, and at the end, if there's any more questions, we'll kind of do a free-for-all at the end.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. I want to hear what everybody's got to say, so I'll be right here.
Nice. Again, that's George Armistead for Rockjumper Birding Tours. So after you've gone on all the Atlanta Audubon birding trips, then you can think about going with George and Josh on their trips as well. So keep that in mind. We're going to move on to Jason Ward next, Atlanta's own. First, I will throw out another trivia question for you guys to think about. The state bird of Georgia is the brown thrasher, which hopefully all you Georgians know. Thrashers are in the family Mimidae, named after their ability to mimic sounds. What 2 other species in the Southeast are in the Mimidae family? So what are the cousins of the brown thrasher down here in Georgia? Awesome. All right, so we're going to move on to Jason now. Jason's host of Birds of North America, his amazing web series. If you haven't checked that out, you should, especially now. Watch it again and again. And I'm sure many of you joined him on Bird Fest walks or walks at Piedmont Park. So Jason, thanks for joining us, man. Dottie, do you have to unmute him, or maybe? Jason's coming, hopefully.
There we go. I'm unmuted.
Sweet. How's it going, man?
Going well, going well. How's everyone?
I'm doing good. I'm hanging in there as best as I can. I told people earlier I was able to track down a hooded warbler at a drainage culvert in my apartment complex on Beaufort Highway, so that was pretty exciting. It's about
That's always a win.
I've gotten so far. Had a fly over great blue heron today, which is always a joy here because I don't have much water to deal with. Yeah, man. Well, thanks for joining us. I'll start the same way I started with George. If you can tell us what you're drinking, if you're drinking anything, and a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now and your show and all that good stuff.
So I am drinking a local beer. This is Atalanta by Orpheus Brewing, which is my favorite brewery just in general. But hey everyone, I'm Jason Ward. I am a native of the South Bronx, New York City, and I've been birding for about 7 years now. So I started to bird around March of 2013, and just casually birding by myself. And I just wanted to know what was going on in the local Atlanta area in terms of just wildlife in general. And I discovered the Atlanta Audubon Society. And upon browsing on their page, I saw that they had a calendar full of field trips that anyone can attend free of charge, just show up. So I bought my $50 pair of Bushnell binoculars to a bird walk one day right here at Piedmont Park in April. And I thought, being a lifelong animal nerd, that I was going to go in there just killing it. You know, I would be able to point out woodpeckers and hawks. That's all I knew at the time, right? But the trip leaders and some of the regulars were so knowledgeable that I wanted to be able to do what they did. So I attended more bird walks, downloaded apps on my phone, and just studied all that I could. 8 months later, I was leading that exact same bird walk. And it's the bird walk that I've led ever since then, which is Piedmont Park on the first Saturday of every month. Shameless plug there. But since then, as far as birding goes, it's just taken over every aspect of my life, including social media. So I started to tweet, pun intended, about birds, and Instagram or whatever I could to pretty much share my passion. And eventually that led to an opportunity. I received a DM one day, and someone wanted to shoot a series of videos about birding in a fresh new light. And I, of course, agreed because I grew up idolizing, you know, the crocodile hunter and all of these characters on Animal Planet and Discovery. So I wanted to be able to do that one day. And this trip was my first opportunity to jump into that realm. And 2 months later, we're in Central Park in May, and we're filming the pilot for what is now 2 seasons and 20 episodes of Birds of North America. So I'm literally being able to live out my dream job, and people are able to enjoy it and watch it. So it's so weird when I say this over and over again because it's like it's actually happening. But yeah, that's what I'm up to these days.
Nice. So I guess my first question, kind of maybe the basic question, is what does quarantine birding look like for you? What have you been doing these past couple of weeks? Find anything exciting?
Yeah, it's creative. You have to get creative when you're quarantine birding, right? You have to avoid certain areas, especially during certain times of like peak hours, right? So my home base, where I honed all of this birding skill is Piedmont Park, which is Atlanta's version of Central Park, right? It's smack dab in the middle of the city. It's a very busy park, multi-use park. And I know that park like the back of my hand, and especially during spring migration, I'm there maybe 3 or 4 times a week on a normal basis. But with, the current situation being that what it is, that not every single human is going to be completely shuttered indoors. So you figure that some of the more popular spots like Piedmont are going to be pretty well trafficked. So unfortunately, I've been, cutting down my time there and spending more time locally and birding my neighborhood and just being creative and trying to find locations that not a lot of people visit.
There's a pair of towies right out off my patio, and I'm certain that they're nesting right in this. Mm-hmm. But I think they're on the back side right by my neighbor's patio. And so I tried to creep over there once, and I just felt a little too weird about it. So I haven't been nest searching as hard as I want to, but I'm certain they're right there.
Yeah, there are limits there.
Well, I'll jump ahead since you mentioned Piedmont Park. I think most people on the call are probably familiar with it. It's kind of, Atlanta Central Park. And Jason, like you said, leads a walk there and birds it really hard. I didn't know if there was a species that's kind of your most wanted bird at Piedmont. Is there something that's eluded you? And then also now you've been birding more statewide also. What's your top target bird for Georgia as well?
Oh goodness. All right. So a bird that has avoided me in Piedmont Park, but has been seen twice in the last 2 years by one individual, one bird who's here. Sean Taylor. She's seen a merlin in Piedmont Park twice, and I love falcons, as everyone that knows me knows, and it's one of the cooler falcons out there, and I missed the chance of seeing it at Piedmont Park more than once. And in the state of Georgia, ruffed grouse. Yeah, ruffed grouse would be the pick there.
Well, maybe it's because I associate you so much with Piedmont Park, because I know that's your spot. But I kind of think of you maybe from that and your time in the Bronx as kind of someone who really enjoys urban birding, or maybe more inner city parks. And I guess my bigger question is, what do you like most about birding in those types of environments?
You know, I like the ability to be able to kind of mimic what I grew up doing. So being in a big city like New York, it's like sensory overload. So there's a lot of sounds coming at you, a lot of sights to see. But in order to not be overwhelmed by all of that, you just kind of have to have selective hearing and vision. Pay attention to different things that are going on. You key in on different sounds coming in from different areas. And that's very similar to skills that we have as birders as well. But to be honest, I'm a city guy at the end of the day. So sometimes being out in, more rural locations and having all of that quiet is a little weird to me at times. So I much prefer to be birding and hearing an ambulance fly by or a jackhammer going off. There's just something about the ability to be able to tune that out and listen to this bird that's singing in a nearby tree that is fun for me.
Nice. Mark asked in the chat box here, how would you compare urban New York City birds to urban Atlanta birds? What species what are relatively rare, kind of the comparison of the two locations?
It's very interesting, birding, of course, here in Atlanta and in New York a lot. And my younger brother, who's 4 years younger than me, is still, he's a birder. He leads trips for New York City Audubon. So I can directly compare this to him. Their state bird is the eastern bluebird up there in New York. Yet, in Central Park and in most of New York City, it is a big deal to see an eastern bluebird. You have to go further upstate New York to be able to see that. So when my brother comes down here, he's just blown away by eastern bluebirds. And, we know that down here in the Southeast, it's like a golf course bird, right? They're pretty much everywhere.
Right.
And I'd say that up there, it's just seeing migration really hit around mid-May and seeing that influx of birds and just seeing the fact that, if you're walking through a huge park like Central Park, which is approximately 800 acres, you're seeing Baltimore Orioles and warbling vireos at every turn. And those are, especially the warbling vireos, something that I don't think I've ever seen in Georgia.
Yeah,
so, yeah. So it's weird to see which species kind of just skips over or just kind of passes us by on the way further north.
Another quick question about Piedmont Park, since you know it pretty well. If people wanted to go chase the black-crowned night heron, when would be the best time to go, considering people? When is it lowest at the park?
I think that considering people and considering the habits of the black-crowned night heron, I think you're in luck, because dawn and dusk are going to be your best times to see this bird for two reasons. One, less people. Two, it's most active during this time. So go there really early in the morning and you'll see it actively feeding, trying to catch crayfish and other things that are in the water there, and or closer to right now, I would assume. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I know you're a big peregrine falcon guy. If you've heard Jason talk or read an article about it, it's always in the preface there about his love of peregrine falcons. If the peregrine falcon was a beer, what type of beer would it be and why?
Ooh, I like this question so much, and I have an answer based on personal experience, okay? The peregrine falcon, just to paint this picture, is a powerful, powerful bird. Speedy, gets the job done really quickly, and it's powerful. I am not an IPA guy, but once I had this local beer, Terrapin. They make this a brand called Hopsecutioner.
Yep, yeah.
That's the peregrine falcon. That's the only time that I ever had just one beer and could not drink another.
So another question is, you and I both have young daughters with a bird middle name. So my daughter is Cora Teal, and yours is Sophia Wren. Is that correct?
Yes, Sophia Wren.
Were there any other bird names under consideration, or if there happens to be another one coming at some point in the future, are there other bird names you're willing to consider?
I don't think so. I think I got my one, my free shot out of the way there. I think I picked a good one, as you did with Teal. I don't even think I thought of Teal, actually. But unless I get, bold enough to name someone Falcon, it's not gonna happen. I don't think that's in the cards.
I love Wren. I pushed hard for that for a first name, and it wasn't happening in my house. Teal was a good compromise. So I'll get you out of here on this last one. is there a certain experience, whether it's a bird encounter or an interview or a place that you visited, that sticks out as most memorable from your Birds of North America series so far?
Wow. I would say it's hard to pick one, but I would say mostly it's the episodes that I get to film with my brother.
Nice.
It's having him be a part of what is now, both of us actually living out our dreams, given the journey that it took to get there, given all of the hardships that we endured growing up with living in a homeless shelter and, basically being in poverty all throughout high school and younger than that. So it's just being able to have that moment where it's kind of like, hey, look at where we are now. That is the most special thing.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you. Well, yeah, if you'll stick around, I know there are a few other questions in the chat box, but we'll get to them after we get to the other speakers. So
Got it. Definitely.
Hopefully I don't seem like too much of a lush here, but I'm moving on to number 2. It's a premium lager from Academia Brewing in Athens, but I only got it because it has this sweet Barnell artwork on the side. So it's a good beer, but it's no Hopsecutioner or Atalanta, so had to stay true. All right, let's do another quick trivia question for you. All right, this one might be easy for some of you on the call. What bird that says its own name is the only flycatcher to overwinter in Atlanta, or pretty much most of the eastern U.S.? We'll leave that there. And our next guest to join me is going to be Matt Johnson. Matt is the Beidler Forest Center Director for Audubon, South Carolina. So he's our neighbor there to the east. Hopefully Matt looks like he's unmuted. How's it going, man? Thanks for joining us.
Doing well. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
If I had known you were going to come with such, background research and questions, I would have made a few of my own. Maybe before we're done, I'll do a little work and see if we can come up with something. But happy to be here. I will say I hope everyone's doing well, and I hate that everything that's happening in the world, and hope everybody's staying safe and healthy. But a little silver lining is that I know I would not have probably gotten the opportunity to be at this event with you all, and it is an honor. It's an honor, and I'm excited about it. So appreciate you having me. And I was mentioning earlier, I've been on a ton of Zoom calls, but this is definitely the best one of the week, a good one to end on. So happy to be here. I can check. Yeah, I hear you. Cheers. So I guess first off, let me say, I'm doing also, like George, a little classic Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. I was at the store earlier this week stocking up on beer, and other things, but beer, and then but completely forgot to get like a Georgia focused beer. So this I think this is North Carolina, so it's somewhere close.
That's all right.
But I'm so I work for Audubon, South Carolina. I'm the center director, and Adam, I'm sorry, it's the Beidler Forest Audubon Center.
Thank you.
But it is a Beidler, so it's confusing. So in South Carolina, we have 2 centers and sanctuaries, one of which is actually closer to Atlanta, right on the Savannah, or right closer to Georgia, right on the Savannah River, Silver Bluff Audubon, not far from Augusta. And then I am our sanctuary and center is closer to Charleston. There's 18,000 acres. It's about a tenth of that, 1,800, is original growth cypress swamp. So it's the largest habitat of its kind in the world. It's a really awesome place. I'm honored to get to work there. And we do a lot of work in South Carolina as similar to a lot of the great work that y'all do at Atlanta Audubon. But, we do bird-friendly communities, sort of working in urban and suburban areas. We have a coastal program where we're working to restore habitat, and then do a lot of sort of like bird-friendly forestry, bird research at our centers and our sanctuaries, and then obviously a lot of education, advocacy. So I enjoy my job because it's a mix of a lot of different things.
Awesome. Thanks, man. And I just realized while you were talking, this was actually the weekend we were supposed to meet up in Atlanta. I think was this week. So
I know.
You invited your brother. If he's here, then
he's here. He's on. He said he was scared. He was worried he was put on video. And I assured him he was okay. But yeah, so we were going to meet up and do a little birding, but this is the next best thing.
Yeah. So during my research about what you guys are doing at the center. I just wanted to ask in general, tell me something cool about the cypress Tupelo swamp that you guys have. Why is it an interesting habitat, and kind of what is the representative bird life that's there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess the way that I sort of characterize it to people that visit, so we have almost a 2-mile elevated boardwalk, and it goes right out to the heart of this old grove. So when you walk out there, you're walking through one of the only places in South Carolina that looks like it would have looked like 500 years ago. And so you get that sort of sense of being in this old, their cypress trees are, we have lots of trees that are dated to sort of that 1,000-year-old range. Of a few trees we know are older than that. So you get this sort of just old growth that you really don't see. I'm not quite as familiar with Georgia. I don't know. There are a few places where that exists. I'm sure there are some. There's only a couple in South Carolina. So you have this sort of just unique old growth cypress swamp with, thousands of cypress knees, and just really cool. And so sort of telling the story of the swamp, and one of the things that we're, kind of trying to do recently is tell the cultural history. So we know that, Native Americans used the swamp. We're learning about and sort of starting to tell a story about groups of people called Maroons that were, escaped slaves that actually were using the swamps, and settlers. So it's kind of telling the natural history, and now try to combine that with some of that cultural history is what we focus on. In terms of the bird life, this time of the year, we're unfortunately closed right now, and I hate it because it's the best time of the year to visit. You get, sort of a lot of those bottomland hardwood songbirds that this time of the year just, have a chorus. There's just a chorus in the tree, amongst the trees. So lots of prothonotary warblers. That's one of the ones we're most known for. And then, your other sort of expected species, summer tanagers, cuckoos, parulas, all the whole gamut there. And then obviously this time of the year, starting to see some of those migrants moving through. So, we'll see a lot of the sort of more common songbird migrants.
Nice, very cool. And you teed me up perfectly. My next question was about Project Protho. I don't know if you could talk just a teeny bit about that, and maybe where some of your banded birds ended up going, and some of the cool individual stories from that project.
Sure, yeah. So it predates me. I started with Audubon in 2013, but we had a project that kind of was already off the ground in South Carolina, looking at or doing just some banding work around those birds at Beidler in particular. They're very abundant, and project kind of started with doing some color banding, so just catching the birds, putting a series of color bands on them so that we can uniquely identify them and kind of studying their breeding ecology. When I started, that kind of morphed into working more at a regional level. So now there's a prothonotary warbler working group that has people involved from about 6 different states within the breeding range. And we've been doing some work with geolocators, so trying to sort of understand that full life cycle conservation, which is such a sort of a buzz phrase and a lot of avian conservation now. Where are the birds going during their migration? Where are they spending the winters? So some really interesting stuff. So in South Carolina, we deployed a series of geolocators, and that was done using similar methods in I think 5 other states, and published a paper last summer on that work. But in South Carolina, a few of our birds that were incorporated into that, they were, crossing the Gulf, going to Cuba, across Cuba to, Central, Eastern Central America, down across Panama, and a lot of birds are going to Colombia, South America. In fact, that was sort of the main takeaway from our research, was regardless of breeding location, and that varied from Wisconsin to the Gulf Coast, Louisiana, and Virginia, South Carolina, the majority of the birds were wintering in Colombia, at least based on this data. But we have some, just some cool research for these birds that are going, so you think about that little bird's, it's 15 grams, like 2/4 in weight. And we at least have a couple individuals that, we caught them at this place this year, put the geolocator on, bird went where it went, came all the way back, literally caught it in the same place. We had one bird that used the same cavity. And then we get the data back, and here's this little bird that managed to make this 5,000-mile, multiple cross ocean trips, flying at night, and can get back to the same spots. I mean, you know, I know for a lot of folks that are on here and the other panelists that, you know, this miracle, this, you know, it's almost unfathomable how these little birds can do that. And of course that's going on right now. So it's just an exciting time, and it's, I don't know, at least for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, it's kind of an escape from everything that's happening. Is kind of like what migrants are showing up in whatever little patch we have to bird, is, I don't know, it's cool stuff.
Yeah, it's great. And you mentioned nocturnal migration. We here in Atlanta do a Lights Out initiative. So if anyone hasn't taken the Lights Out pledge, now's a great time to do it. If you're bored, it's a great time to make your windows safe for spring migration. And you mentioned earlier that you kind of are heavily involved with the bird friendly communities work in South Carolina. And I was just kind of curious what that looks like for you, and if there's anything that you would recommend that people can do at home while we're all stuck inside that can help birds.
Sure. I mean, I have been involved in that. We have I have several other colleagues that work a lot more in that field. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention people like Jen Tyrell and some of our other staff in South Carolina. But a lot of our focus has been on native plants. So in South Carolina, we passed in the General Assembly a South Carolina Native Plant Week, which is celebrated every October. And we do a lot of, I think, similar things to what y'all do in Atlanta, Adam, backyard habitat programming, working with schools, trying to work with community groups. But a lot of it focuses around native plants. And so we think about this time of the year, you know, a lot of people are turning their attention to whatever yard space they have, or a patio, or that's the beauty of native plants is, you know, you don't need a big area. It can be little things, container gardens where you're planting, you know, whatever, columbine or whatever your favorite plant is. You know, this time of year, I think a lot of those things that have red tubular flowers for hummingbirds, so columbines and coral honeysuckle, you know, crossvine, that list goes on and on. But that's an easy thing that we can do. And you already stole the other ones I was going to say, which is like window collisions. I mean, that's, you know, I know y'all talk a lot about that, but that's one of those things that is, you know, hundreds of millions of birds every year, and almost everybody at everybody's house has a window collision story. And when you add those numbers up, it's kind of astounding. So, you know, I tell people a lot, you know, don't clean your windows. You can blame it on me if somebody in your house gets mad at you, but keep them a little bit less reflective, put decals on them. There's obviously a lot of tapes and different things. I know y'all have worked a lot on that, which is really awesome. But, you know, and then obviously I won't turn my computer, but I have a sleeping cat here next to me. But in keeping those cats inside, you know, indoor cats are the way to go. Or if you want to get creative, patios, you know, outdoor patios for your cat. But, you know, that's another big issue that we try to talk about in South Carolina, of keeping those cats inside.
Great. Now, this probably feels like 5 years ago, but it was just over a month ago that I saw on Facebook you were birding down in Florida and other parts further south, and you were chasing a couple of rare birds, and I think you got one and you dipped on the other, something like that. So I just didn't know if you want to either retell those stories, or if you have any memorable last second gets or great bird chases, and then the inverse, those painful dips or times that you missed on a big bird.
Well, that's a great question. In fact, maybe two of the best were what happened on that trip. But it wasn't so much that we dipped on the one bird; it was the fact that somebody got it the next day. So a lot of y'all probably are aware of or have already seen. There's an American flamingo that has been wintering at St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge. So a couple of friends and I went down and spent the entire day walking around the very specific impoundments where that bird has been seen, and we did not see it. And it was seen by multiple people the following day, but very close to there. I think it was Florida's first record for Scott's Oriole. I may be wrong on that, but only a few records of it. In fact, South Carolina had our first record for that species a couple years ago. But that was visiting a backyard feeder. We kind of had set ourselves, and we were driving back to South Carolina. It was about a 6.5 hour drive. We said, okay, we are leaving no later than 5 o'clock, and we managed to get see that. We'd been there for multiple hours, managed to see that bird like, 10 minutes before we were like getting ready to leave. So, we had our highs and lows on that trip. I can't think of maybe another one that's that extreme off the top of my head, but of course, that's kind of in the fun of the chase, as I'm sure others on here know. It's can be rewarding or it can be frustrating, but I don't know. I try to enjoy the experience, enjoy the camaraderie with birding friends and seeing places that I had never been to St. Mark's before. So it's just kind of fun to check it out. But I would have liked to have seen that flamingo.
Well, I'll get you out here on this last one. Eastern bluebird or northern cardinal? Who's your pick for our bracket challenge?
I mean, so we run a map station in South Carolina where we band, and I've been bitten by enough cardinals to know that I won't vote for them. They're fierce, understandably so when you're banning them, but I have to go with the bluebird.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks, Matt. There's at least one more question for you, but I'll save it to the end just to kind of keep us rotating through the people here. But thanks again, man.
You bet.
All right, we're going to move on to Abby Sterling next. But before that, I'll toss out another Adam Betuel trivia question for you. All right, what woodpecker also goes by these nicknames? Half a shirt, shirt-tail bird, jellycoat, flag bird, and the flying checkerboard. If you visit the All About Birds webpage, these are some good colloquial names I didn't know about until stumbling across them. All right, so let's go ahead and pull up Abby. Abby, how's it going?
Great, thank you so much. This is so awesome. People from all over, and it's so nice to be here with all of you. Can you hear me?
Perfect, yeah, perfect.
Okay.
I will start with the same two questions. If you're drinking something, what is it? And then tell us about yourself and the work you do for Manomet.
All right, I'm drinking this Creature Comforts
Oh, nice, yeah.
Paradiso, which is very delicious, and I've been actually saving it in my fridge for months. Glad that it's still good. And hopefully once travel bans are lifted and I can visit Athens again, I'll be able to restock. But I work for Manomet, which is a nonprofit conservation organization based in Massachusetts. And we do a lot of different things, but we have a huge kind of branch of the organization that's dedicated to shorebird recovery. So Manomet houses a couple different programs that focus on shorebird conservation. We've got a research program, also the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network falls sort of underneath the Manomet umbrella. And then there's the division that I work in, which talks about habitat management for shorebirds. I work locally here in Georgia on a project called the Georgia Bight Shorebird Conservation Initiative. And the idea behind that program is that the southeastern coast is very important for shorebirds. We've got some pretty unparalleled habitat. And so I work from northeastern Florida, the Georgia coast, and the South Carolina coast, trying to build partnerships and increase collaboration and sort of increase capacity and awareness for the habitat that we have here and the importance that it provides to shorebirds really throughout the entire year. So I get to do a lot of things like working with partners like Georgia Department of Natural Resources, South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, Audubon folks, other nonprofits, private landowners, really trying to build these networks that can help increase conservation action for shorebirds in that area.
Nice. Do you have a spark bird? Was there some bird that got you hooked on birds or bird watching years ago?
Well, I think I always grew up knowing birds, not like, well or by name necessarily, but always paid attention to birds. Pileated woodpecker was probably one of the first in undergrad ornithology class where I was just blown away, getting a really good look at it. It was incredible. But spark shorebird is probably the American oyster catcher. So that, I think, led me down this path where I'm sitting now today is the oyster catcher.
So shorebirds, I think for many birders are a bit divisive. It seems like some people really love shorebirds and some people are really scared and put off by shorebirds. And I'm not sure if that's because, I don't know, they seem distant or, you know, at least in the winter, they can be kind of hard to tell apart. But why do you love shorebirds?
They are tricky for sure, but there's a couple really good benefits to shorebirds. One, they are never hidden in the treetop, right? Like you never hear a shorebird biologist complain about warbler neck. So that's a big winning point right there. I think that the reason that I really love shorebirds is I think they're a very dynamic group of birds that that allow you to tell some pretty cool stories, right? They're traveling the whole entire globe. The migration of any of these shorebirds. Right now we've got whimbrels migrating back up through, and I think whimbrels are my favorite for right now. It changes probably every other week, but right now it's whimbrels. And so the whimbrels are leaving the north coast of South America, coming up, and we'll start to see huge numbers of whimbrels gathering southeast, staging on their way up to the Arctic where they nest. And so during the day, they're kind of spread all throughout the salt marsh eating fiddler crabs, which is like an all-you-can-eat buffet. So they are never hungry in Georgia and South Carolina. And then at night, they go out to these very remote sandbars where they gather in huge, huge groups and have these special night roosts. And they do that just for the spring window, and then they go up to the Arctic. And so I think for me, shorebirds are a really cool way to tell the story about how important coastal conservation is, how important it is to build strong networks and strong partnerships, because you've got animals that are depending on people in all of these different places in all these different countries across the whole hemisphere. You need all those folks to work together to protect the places that they require. And then they just, I think, are doing something that's incredible, and they really do a good job of connecting people.
Is there a shorebird species that you haven't seen that you would love to before, you know, whenever you can?
Oh, there's so many really cool ones in South America that I would love to see. There's a couple, I think maybe in North America, I haven't seen a mountain plover, and I would really like to see a mountain plover. That would round out my plovers. So it's probably the most feasible at this point right now.
Yeah. Well, one thing, you've seen some, or I've seen at least some of these stories that are showing the unintended, you know, not benefits, but silver linings in some of the COVID stuff where you see pollution decreasing rapidly in China and animals coming back to more urban spaces. But when I see those stories, I thought a lot about the coast. Now, we won't talk about our governor and views on beaches, but in general, I assume there are going to be less people on beaches for the next at least month or so.
Yeah.
I wondered how that might be a benefit for shorebirds and kind of what your thoughts are, the unintended minor benefits of this, at least for the birds.
Yeah, we had 2 weeks where the beaches were closed. And I know you guys in South Carolina are having still beaches closed. And so there were a couple weeks where I was really, obviously I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's, you know, that was like the only silver lining was that the birds were going to have a chance to find the spots that they wanted to nest and, you know, feed during migration. So right now it's nesting starting and migration. So it's so much going on the coast, and it was going to be very cool. I'm working on a project with partners at National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and National Audubon and Virginia Tech that's looking at disturbance of public beaches and how people in beaches are impacting birds. I had actually been collecting data at 4 public beaches in Georgia since July, and then I had this incredible scientific experiment where all of the people were removed from the beaches for a couple of weeks, and I thought it was going to last a little bit longer, and we might actually see some distinct changes in terms of where birds were nesting or birds were coming back. On Tybee Island, we had 3 black-necked stilts on the beach just before they opened the beaches back up, which was really cool. It is quieter right now, and so that's interesting. There's a couple of challenges with that. One, we can't do education and outreach, which we do a lot of, so that makes it really hard, but luckily there's been some long-running programs in Georgia, so people are pretty aware once we rope off areas that birds are nesting. And then the other interesting unintended consequence is a lot of people are going out to visit these more remote places, it seems like spring. Some of the sandbars and shell rakes and in areas on some of the barrier islands are getting a lot more odor traffic right now because people want to be more broadly spaced. But those places are really important for migrating birds like red knot, some of the other Arctic nesting shorebirds. So it's, as always, a complicated story.
Right, right. We got a question here from Andrew Dreelan, and it's for you, which is good because I've also talked about this with Bob Cooper, who is your advisor, but much of Manomet's great work grows out from its roots as a bird observatory. Lots of bird observatories dedicated to monitoring migration sites in the Northeast, but comparatively there are few in the Southeast. Any thoughts on whether you think it's feasible to build a bird observatory in Georgia, and if so, where would you put it in the state?
Is this in a dream world scenario here?
Sure, go for it, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think there are some long-running banding projects that happen. You know, I think immediately of Jekyll Island, they do a banding station and have for, I don't even know how long, but for a long time. Yeah, I do think the coast is a really special place, but I'm so biased. So, I mean, I don't know if that's really fair for me to say I would put it on the coast, but I think I would.
When I talked to Bob, I think he was pushing for Brunswick or somewhere down there pretty hard.
I think there's some good opportunities and there's some cool history with, you know, like Sapelo Island and the whole start of ecology with Eugene Odom and just some of those things, but yeah.
Well, one more before you go. You know the question, is it a bluebird or cardinal?
I'm going to go with, that's a pretty tough one, but I think I might go for a cardinal because I do like, I like how feisty they are. I like a bird that would like bite you when you're trying to band it.
Right.
Shorebirds are so sweet and they just kind of, like when you're banding them, they give up and their world is ended and they just are patient and then they're released and they're happy. But I like that cardinals will give you a little.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, I think the only thing that's bit me harder is a rufous-browed pepper shrike I caught in a net in Paraguay and it drew blood, but the cardinals don't feel good. Yeah. All right, before we move on to Josh Engel, who's our last guest here, got another trivia question. What raptor was thought to have no successful nesting attempts throughout the state of Georgia in the early 1970s, but today produces over 200 breeding pairs? So early 70s, almost completely gone from breeding in Georgia, but now they've rebounded so well that DNR has actually reduced their surveying effort because they're doing so well, relatively speaking. All right, and our last guest, we have Josh Engel. He's the owner and lead guide for Redhill Birding. How's it going, Josh?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. We were already talking about this idea a little bit internally, but I was actually on the Chicago Ornithological Society Birds and Beer get together a week or two ago. I crashed it. So I completely ripped them off and stole a guest as well. So it was great. But yeah, Josh, why don't you tell us what you're drinking and what you do at Redhill?
I've got a local beer, a charlatan from Maplewood Brewing. We've got a ton of local. I think Atlanta has a lot too. We got a lot of breweries here in Chicago. This is just one of them. It's a good one. So I started Redhill Birding a couple years ago. I worked for many years guiding tours for other companies, and I worked as a researcher studying birds for a while. But this is, starting my own tour company was something that I always wanted to do, and the timing was right, and so I went for it. And I do tours in the U.S., but also internationally, all over the world.
Awesome, thanks, Josh. And just for a little background, I was backpacking with a buddy of mine when I was a junior in college. And I had enough frequent flyer miles to go to South America. And I tried to go to Peru and it was blacked out. And I went to Ecuador and my parents gifted me 2 nights at an eco lodge. And I happened to run into Josh. And he was nice enough. I think he was happy to be birding with someone who was, younger than 60. And he took me around one morning and I got some quetzals and other good birds. And then we parted ways and then randomly met up at a bar in Quito a couple days later, and we've kept in touch. So it's kind of a random bird friendship there. But my first question for you, which you mentioned earlier when you were talking to the other panelists, what are you seeing up there in Chicago? What's going on bird-wise from your apartment or your house?
Well, we're a lot later than you guys are, so migrants are only trickling in. You know, we've got our first yellow-rumped warblers and hermit thrushes and sapsuckers and creepers coming in now. I had amazing happening today. I looked out my window. I live in a pretty dense urban area on the north side of Chicago, and looked out my window and I could see a bird sitting up on top of a distant building, and I had an inkling of what it was. I pulled out my scope and there was a peregrine falcon sitting there. So it was there for quite a bit of the afternoon. The only other thing that I have going from my window right now is there's a crow nest in a distant yard, so I can see the birds switching when they're sitting on eggs still. I think there's at least 3 birds, maybe even more, that are helping out at the nest. So that's keeping me entertained a little bit while I'm inside.
Nice, nice. So I know from talking to you that you have an interest and a lot of experience doing guiding in Africa. And I could be wrong, but I think a lot of the bird watchers in the US are more familiar with the species in the neotropics, you know, similar families, migration, all that stuff. But what are some African or old world families or species that us New World birders should know about?
All of them. No, I mean, there's some really amazing birds that are only found in Africa. I mean, one that is absolutely a standout, partially because it's a family of 20-something species called turacos. You can see them all across the continent. There's groups of them. There's a few species that are just gray or gray and white, and even those ones are beautiful and striking and loud. But it's the brightly colored ones that are so extraordinary. Some of them are just this intense green. Some are intense purple. There's one called great blue turaco, which is just this enormous blue bird. And a lot of them have a totally different color wing. So when they fly, it almost looks like a different bird. There's interesting things going on with their biology too. They have pigments in their feathers that are totally unique to that family of birds. But turacos are definitely a standout. And I mean, I can't talk about unique African birds without mentioning ostrich. Biggest bird in the world, a very well-known bird. But I mean, going into the African savanna and seeing a bunch of ostriches walking around where there's elephants on one side and maybe giraffes on the other. And, that's sort of something it seems like it's out of fantasy, but you go to Africa and the reality is you can see ostriches while you're out birding.
So with your guiding, is there a memorable experience that kind of sticks out, whether it's, a great bird or a car breaking down or you're getting wildebeest or, is there anything that sticks out?
I try to forget all of the car breakdowns,
Right.
but they've happened many times. And oh man, there's so many. I mean, one that stands out mentioning car breakdowns is I got a van. A lot of the South Africa trips that I do, Southern Africa trips that I do. I lived in South Africa for several years, which is why I have a lot of experience there. And I moved back to Chicago in 2010, but I still go back every year to lead trips. But a lot of those, I drive the groups myself. So rent a car and drive people around. And, rainy season can get very wet there and the roads can get muddy. And I remember getting stuck in the mud one time in one of these big wildlife preserves that has all of the dangerous animals that you try to avoid when you're not in a vehicle. And most of these places you're not even allowed out of the vehicle, but I got stuck in the mud, so I had to get out. And we tried everything to get out of this. It was just a little pothole. It wasn't even that much, but so we got stuck. And of course, no cell phone reception in this place, even though I knew there was some around. So the only thing I could do was to walk and find cell phone reception. I figured I'd climb a tree maybe to get cell phone reception. So I started walking. I was going to call the lodge where we were staying, have them send somebody out to pull us out. And I got very lucky. I only walked a couple hundred yards, keeping a very careful eye out for lion tracks or, elephants in the brush next to me. And I saw a car coming the other way. And so I waved them down as one of these Land Cruisers that people used to drive around Africa. And it turned out to be a Belgian couple that had driven from Belgium to Namibia all the way across Africa. And they said, yeah, no problem. So they drove me back to where the vehicle was stuck, hooked up a rope, pulled us out, no problem. They said, this deserves a celebration. And they opened up in the back of their car, and they actually had a working refrigerator in the back of their car. They said, let's have a beer to celebrate. So here we are in the middle of this game reserve, pulled out a few beers, said cheers, thanked them, drank our beer, and went on with our birding. So, it's funny, those are the things that really stand out. Those experiences really stand out sometimes on when you travel a lot.
Outside of Africa, another place that I kind of associate with you is Bhutan. I know that you've birded there a good bit. I think you're actually the eBird reviewer for Bhutan. How did that country get on your radar? How did it why did it interest you as a bird watching destination? I personally know so little about it. So anything you can talk about with Bhutan?
Well, actually, as a kid, before I was really studying field guides and into birds, I loved maps. I loved atlases. I'd memorize countries and capitals. So I knew about Bhutan, and then as I started getting into birds, it's in the Himalayas, it has a lot of cool birds, but I was living in South Africa working as a full-time birding guide, and the company I was working for, sort of through a series of events offered me to let me guide Bhutan trips. They were just starting. We were going to do a scouting trip first because the company had never run a trip there. So we got some of our regular clients and put together this first trip, and I was lucky enough to be the company representative. And after that, I started going there regularly. And the first trip that I did there for birding, it's an amazing country. It's super, super mountainous. Has a lot of pheasants that the Asian mountains are famous for. Has amazing culture. It doesn't have a lot of tourists, which is a big draw. But that first trip there, our local guide, tourism in Bhutan is a little bit different. You're required to have to use a local company and to have a local guide with you at all times. It's the law there. So the company that arranged the trips, they gave us a guide, and I don't think he had ever been birding. He had a pair of nice binoculars, but he had basically never been birding. And so it was a little bit iffy, didn't know what was going to happen, but he was super into it. Very enthusiastic. We really got along well. And from that trip, he really got into birding, and he became one of the top birders in Bhutan. He ended up leaving that company and starting his own birding company that runs birding tours in Bhutan. And so now when I take groups back there, I use his company, and I use that same guide that now I've known for over a decade to run my trips there. So that's, it's like how we met many years ago. Some of these fortuitous circumstances can really, you never know where they're going to lead. But the birding in Bhutan is fantastic. And it's just an amazing country because the architecture is so beautiful. The scenery in the Himalayas is gorgeous. As a country, they have a very strong conservation ethic. So there aren't too many places in the world now where you can drive extensive distances or extensive amounts of time on highways and have a lot of it be forested. But Bhutan still has, a really amazing amount of forests. So it's a really great place to go.
Awesome. And one more destination I wanted to mention that I think maybe twice or for a good chunk of time this past winter before we all started to hunker down, you went up to Minnesota to do some nice winter birding up there. And you're actually working with our development director, Michelle, on Atlanta Audubon's trip to northern Minnesota in February of next year. Hopefully things will be, back to normal, and we'll all be eager to chase birds and travel by then. But can you talk a little bit about the, Sax-Sim and all the exciting birds? I know George got a great gray owl, maybe not there, but somewhere this year, which was a new North American bird for him. So yeah, what's special about that place, and why should people join you and Michelle?
Yeah, Sax-Sim Bog has become like a legendary winter birding place in the U.S. In the Midwest, we always knew about it, and I've been going there since I was in high school, actually. I did some road trips up there with one of my birding mentors a couple of times during the winter. But now it's this, world famous, or at least nationally famous place to see, especially to see great gray owl and other boreal birds in winter. And they have especially in Sax-Zim Bog itself, which is actually a mix of private and public lands, and it's a huge area. But they have a great infrastructure set up. There's a group called Friends of Sax-Zim Bog that has a visitor center there now. They produce a map of all the places with bird feeders because, you know, a lot of these boreal finches, you know, evening grosbeak and pine grosbeak and redpolls and stuff, you know, it really helps to have feeders so you can know where to go to see the feeders. And it's a beautiful, beautiful landscape in the winter. It's very stark. It's not crowded, of course, because it's the middle of winter in northern Minnesota. And as long as you're prepared for the cold, it's really a good time. And, you know, Sax-Zim also, you know, if you're very lucky, that it'll be a good year for owls, and you can see great gray owl, hawk owl, boreal owl. This year wasn't a great year, but I was incredibly lucky with the timing of my trips. We just happened to be there when there was a very reliable boreal owl being seen and a very reliable great gray owl. So I felt very lucky in that way. And then you go, I mean, Sax-Zim, it's northern Minnesota has really extensive forest in general. So we also go up to Superior National Forest, look for spruce grouse, boreal chickadees. There's lakeshore there, which some years is frozen, some years isn't. You know, I was thinking about this year, it was the best weather. I've been running tours up there now 4 winters in a row. And this year was by far the warmest. It was, I don't think it ever got below 10 degrees. The whole 10 days I was there over 2 trips. Which is about 40 degrees warmer than it was there last year when it got, or 2 winters ago when it got down to like minus 36, 38. And, you know, as we're driving along early in the morning, we're watching the thermometer in the car drop and drop, and there's people leaning forward, taking pictures of the thermometer every time it would go down a degree. I think it got down to minus 38 was the coldest that we saw. It's an adventure. But it works, you know, as long as you see the birds, you're happy.
Right. And then to finish on, are we going for bluebird or cardinal?
Well, cardinal is a state bird of Illinois, so I have to represent. But there's, you know, there's a little movement in Illinois among the more bird oriented to try to axe the cardinal is a state bird of 6 birds, not very original. So I think that we'd really like the red-headed woodpecker to become the state bird of Illinois. I don't know what that takes, but anyway, cardinal gets my vote.
Awesome. And then before we open it up, there were a few questions that, Dottie, I'm not sure if you can kind of unmute all the panelists maybe. Someone actually was excited and emailed us earlier, and I can answer a couple of these questions. One was about websites where you can look up different bird calls to better learn them and to study. Macaulay Library from Cornell is the one that's great. Another one, if you want to download the calls, is Xenocanto. It's Xenocanto. That's a great spot to download user-submitted calls, so you kind of have to pick and choose or find the good ones. There's a lot of less than stellar audio recordings. The Audubon app is free, and it's great for that. Merlin is another free app that's great. Trying to think if and you know, with eBird, they have a really cool thing where you can do quizzes. So if you go to the Explore tab on eBird and go down to photo and audio quizzes, pick your area and your date and pick audio, and you can test yourself on some of the bird sounds. So I'm not sure if any other panelists have other audio resources, but those are the ones that stuck out to me if you wanted to learn more about sounds and calls and good resources, but feel free to chime in. Someone also asked about bluebird nest site. Nestwatch.org is another Cornell program, which is a great resource. You can look up eastern bluebird. It'll tell you how high the nest box should be, that it should preferably face east, that they like grassy areas or edges of forests. So those are another good thing to check out, a few of those questions. Matt, I know there was a question for you earlier about ivory-billed woodpeckers. Is there any history of those in South Carolina and some of those extensive swamps? Did they go that far north? Were they there? What's the story?
They were there. I don't think they've been there for a long time, despite a lot of the efforts that were put in, I guess, close to a decade ago to look. A lot of that was focused in sort of the Arkansas area, I know, but there were some searches in places like the Congaree National Park in South Carolina, and even at the Beidler forest. Despite the sort of the continued calls that I feel like we get from the local community of sightings, I have yet to see a confirmed photo. But, you know, one can remain hopeful. You know, I think one of the things we talk about a little bit at Beidler is with it being old growth, you have a lot of, you know, you have old trees, but you have like trees that have been dead and laying on the ground for, you know, 100 years. And so you think, well, it's probably not an ivory-billed woodpecker, but is there a cavity that an ivory-billed woodpecker made? Is there you know, they had the distinct foraging, you know, pattern, and you know, is there something like that? And you know, that's kind of speculative, but certainly occurred there. In fact, one of the last sightings in the United States was in the Santee Swamps in South Carolina. But you know, despite our continued hope, there have been no confirmed sightings in any recent times that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Someone asked if any of us could recommend a reference book that goes deeper into species or families. They have some of the Peterson reference guides. He's interested in the old Arthur Cleveland Bent life history books of. One thing that came to mind, which isn't a book, but the Birds of the World. I know I just keep plugging all these, you know, Cornell. It's not just Cornell, but Birds of North America is now Birds of the World, and there's a whole bunch of information there if you pay the 30 or 40 bucks for the subscription. But do any of you have any book recommendations that maybe go into a specific species or family or grouping of those?
There's a Bird Families of the World book that was published by Lynx Editions. Sean Billerman was one of the authors. Book, I think.
Nice. And someone asked earlier, and I'm going to put it on Jason just because he had his recent Instagram story showing off his Swarovski haul. Someone was talking about the new Swarovski optics that have the built-in Merlin. I forget the model, but if anyone knows, has anyone played with those or experimented or seen them in person?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I got to play with them a little bit in the Rio Grande Festival in Texas, and they are going to be a special edition, so to what everyone knows as far as optics goes. So I'm a little bit surprised with the advances in technology in general that, you know, something like this hasn't already been, you know, created. It's not perfected by any stretch, but this is seemingly, I mean, I could be wrong, with this is seemingly the first of its kind, and it's a device, a monocular, which you can look at birds and also then take a photo of it and immediately upload it to Merlin so it can ID it for you. So it's a special kind of device there.
Nice. Abby, here's another question for you about the golden ray and the dismantling down there. Are there any plans for future impact studies or anything on how that might connect with birds?
Yeah, it's so for those of you that don't know, that's the big cargo ship that tipped over back in September in the channel going out from Brunswick, and it had about 4,000 cars on it, and it's been sitting with a variety of different things happening to try to get it out of the channel, trying to cause as little damage as possible. There's been a couple small oil spills from that where we saw oiled marshes and actually documented some shorebirds that had visible oil on them, but it was only 3 days of discharge from the ship. And for the rest of the time, so far as we can tell, we've been really, really lucky. So it's, there's a huge, very complicated command center that's in charge of the removal and monitoring of everything. And I've gone to different public meetings and things like that and talked to people who are in that role. And I work really closely with the Department of Natural Resources folks like Tim Kais, who I think many of you all know really well. You know, so there will be monitoring and things like that. And so far we've been really lucky. I've asked them about, particularly, you know, I think one of the big important things is to think about sediments and in the invertebrate community and how that would impact birds that are feeding in the area, or, you know, oyster catchers eating filter feeders like oysters. And so I've talked to people about it, but right now it's very, it's a mess in a lot of different senses. And so there's not any, like, there's no firm plans. Right now they're just getting to the point where they're going to start slicing it like a loaf of bread and delicately lifting big chunks of a giant cargo ship up out of the channel.
Wow. I did forget one more trivia question here. I said warblers are the top targets for many bird watchers in the springtime. What warbler species that likes to spend time on the ground gets its name from its covered nest with a side entrance? So I'll let you guys think about that for a second. There was another question we got via email. Someone was interested in attracting towhees to their yard, and that might not be an easy thing to do. It's pretty common down here, but I wanted to mention it only because something that Matt's talked about and that we talk about with our sanctuary program is the importance of structural diversity in your vegetation. You know, I think here in Atlanta, we're lucky enough that we have a pretty well intact tree canopy for such a big area. And the canopy is, of course, vitally important for birds and for carbon sequestration and, you know, heat island effect, all sorts of stuff. But, you know, dense lower understory plants, which those towhees are going to like, you know, ground cover, mid-story, berry producing bushes for thrushes, you know, stuff for that warbler that I just teased in the last trivia question. So it's important to think about all the demands of the diversity of birds that we have here in the U.S. And
I would also,
go ahead,
I agree.
please.
And I would just say, I was going to add like a diversity of like deciduous and evergreen. So having some of that cover in the winter, right now there's a lot of cover, but in the winter having that hollies and those other sort of evergreen plants are great for all of the winter species that are here.
Right. And that same person, you know, we already hit on this, so I don't want to, you know, keep going at it, but that person has a neighbor with an outdoor cat that they work very hard to keep out of the yard, but his nest on or near the ground, as do many sparrows and other birds. And so it's going to be especially impactful for something like that. We're almost out of time, but I want to throw one more question for you all. A bad ID story. So I forget who wrote it, and one of my colleagues reminded me to mention this. Someone wrote an article recently talking about, you know, that even the best of us, which many of you are the best birders around, make pretty egregious mistakes. You know, we all have at least us northern birders, I'm from Ohio, originally have the, you know, the white trash bag that's a snowy owl in the winter or something along those lines. I didn't know if any of you had a really bad ID mishap that you're actually willing to share. One of my big day teammates, Shannon, is on the call or on the chat here. And a couple years ago, we were down at Onslow Island outside of Savannah, and we were probably on hour, I don't know, 20 of being awake. And we're going, and we have all these great shorebirds. And I'm like, oh, there's something weird in the back. And we're just going so fast. Take some photos. We're kind of moving on, like, oh, yeah, that's great. It was an upland sandpiper. And then we send word back, which was odd on the coast, but, you know, we're rolling with it, and we feel like we're pretty good birders. And it was a ruff, or a reeve, actually. But we were just so, like, out of it that we didn't even think about the better, rarer bird that could have been there. And it just looked lanky at the time and plain. And we posted to Facebook and then got our asses handed to us on a Facebook comment and felt very embarrassed for the rest of the day and did not beat the state record. So it was a double whammy. But if any of you have any stories you're willing to share of mix-ups, I'd love to hear them. Or not.
One that stands out for me was when it was a good lesson to learn because I was a very young birder at the time. And I was on Camp Chiricahua, which is this birding camp for young birders that is run by Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours. And it was the first day, and we were out in the Sonoran Desert, just outside of Tucson, and we see a Harris's hawk sitting on a saguaro cactus in the distance. And everyone is pumped, right? Life for Harris's hawk for all 10 of us or whatever. And we're all excited, and we're looking at it. And we're like, okay, somebody should go back and get the scope from the car. So somebody ran back to the car, got the scope, ran back. Is it still there? Oh yeah, it's still there. It hasn't moved. Perfect. We set up the scope, and of course it's just a piece of the cactus right there. You know, just far away. And we were all ready to have Harris's hawk. All 10 of us, hotshot young birders, were ready to have Harris's hawk on our life list because of a piece of a cactus. So, you know, good lesson to learn as a kid. I try not to mistake plants too often for birds anymore. It still happens, but I try to avoid it.
I mean, for me, one species that always gets me, and it shows that I'm biased towards birds of prey, mourning doves. There's something about just whipping my head around and seeing a mourning dove zoom by that makes me yell out, Cooper's Hawk, to people. And each and every time it is a mourning dove, and I've done it a bunch of times on those guided field trips that I lead, and I've just started to own it, and it doesn't even really bother me anymore.
Awesome. All right, just to run back through the trivia real quick before we go. So number one was, which of these bird-themed breweries are real breweries? Hermit Thrush Brewery, Rare Bird Brew Pub, Birds Fly South Brewing, Dead Bird Brewing, and all of the above. It is all of the above. So Hermit Thrush Brewing is in Vermont, Rare Bird is in Traverse City, Michigan, which if you joined me for our Atlanta Audubon trip up there last year, we ended our trip after getting some good birds. Birds Fly South, I was hoping Matt would know that. It's over in South Carolina. And Dead Bird is up in Milwaukee, I believe. The chicken-like bird breeds in northern Georgia that feeds on vegetation and drums. It's the state bird of Pennsylvania. It's the ruffed grouse. So Jason mentioned that's a bird he needs for the state. The state bird of Georgia is the thrasher. The other two mimics in the southeast are the northern mockingbird and the gray catbird. The bird that says its name, that's the only overwintering flycatcher in Atlanta, is the eastern phoebe. The woodpecker that goes by half a shirt-tail bird, jellycoat. I like jellycoat the best. Flagbird and flying checkerboard is the red-headed woodpecker. So maybe keep that as some evidence there, Josh, when you make a push for the state bird of Illinois. The raptor that had no successful breeding attempts in the early 70s in Georgia, it's now over 200 pairs, is the bald eagle. And then the warbler, that's a ground-dwelling bird that has a covered nest with a side entrance, is, of course, the ovenbird. So I think we've answered all the questions. I want to thank again Abby, George, Josh, Matt, and Jason. This was a lot of fun. We had a good crowd, I think. So I really appreciate you all hanging out and drinking beer with me. I'm going to go enjoy my third one I just cracked open, Duende, another Creature Comforts beer. Jason, if you want a Hopsecution or Buzz, you should track down these. They're pretty good. So this will be the Prairie Falcon of beers, I guess. If it's not the
Adam, are you gonna answer Bluebird or Cardinal? We have to know.
I voted for Bluebird. And Jason, I think I forgot. Did I forget to ask you, Jason?
Yes, my vote is Cardinal.
Oh, 4-2 for the Cardinals. I thought it might be a 3-3 split. So I don't know if Dottie has a live running ticker. We have Facebook voting and Instagram voting. Facebook was leaning Bluebird earlier. So tomorrow you have to get on our Facebook page and see who the big winner is. I know another local nonprofit did a similar thing, and they had Nuthatch actually won the poll, but we have a lot more people voting, so we'll see. Awesome. Well, thank you all. It's 8:30. Go enjoy some more beverages, and yeah, hopefully we'll do this in person sometime.
Thanks, Adam.
And maybe we'll do another one of these. But yeah, stay safe, everybody. Thank you so much.
Cheers,
Thanks,
guys.
Adam.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.